organizing, queer organizing on the East Coast and the West Coast of New York and in the major cities. Very little has been published about queer organizing in the Midwest, and even less, we have even less material on queer organizing by people of color in the Midwest. And I was actually inspired to begin this work when I read an article by Horacio Roque Ramirez on queer organizations in San Francisco in the 1970s. It was a beautiful article, talked about all the complications of the organizing, and I thought, wow, why doesn't anything like this exist on Latino organizing in Chicago? So I started thinking about that, and at the same time I was working with Amigas Latinas, one of the organizations that I'll be talking about today. So that even increased my desire to tell this story. So that's, I really am interested in making sure that the efforts and the successes and the challenges of queer organizing by Latinas, by lesbians, is part of our history. And another thing I was interested in looking at is the sustainability of Latina lesbian organizations. As you might know, there's this problem with grassroots organizing, with grassroots organizations. They don't tend to last very long, many of them. They get off to a great start, there's a lot of energy around them, and then they crash and burn. So another motivation of the study was to look at this question of sustainability of grassroots organizing work. So what I'll tell you about today is the two organizations that came up, one, LLENA, which came up in 1998 and lasted 3 years, and I'll tell you about Amigas Latinas, an organization that was founded in 1995, and is currently in kind of hiatus, but it has lasted over 15 years. And what I want to talk about is people have this idea that Latinos as a group are kind of a monolithic group, and they're really much more complicated than people usually think about. And when you think about Latinos, it's a pan-ethnic label, and it includes people of different nationalities, it includes people who are documented, people who are undocumented, people from different races, people from different classes. So there are all these differences within this pan-ethnic term of Latinos. And I was interested in these organizations, how they manage those differences, because these organizations brought together many people, many women across all of these differences. Well, how exactly was that accomplished, or what challenges did that entail, and how were those challenges approached? The other thing I'll tell you a little bit about is the coalition efforts of these groups, both in terms of their efforts to reach out and work with other queer and Latino organizations in Chicago, as well as transnationally. And that's my plan for the talk. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my methods for the work. First, I interviewed leaders from both of these two groups, from Amigas Latinas and LLENA. Some of the leaders are no longer, especially for the LLENA folks, I had a harder time tracking them down, but I did. I was able to talk to the leader, Amparo Jimenez, via Skype. She lives in Mexico City. During work trips, research trips, I interviewed people in other parts of the country, like LA and New York. So I was able to interview, I think it was 20 different leaders from both of the groups. Everyone I interviewed about the organization was very helpful in terms of providing archival materials. Some of them had files that they kept over the years. They had minutes, they had newsletters, Latinas is very good, was very good about keeping all of their meeting agendas, their grant submissions, all of this material, which is very helpful to me. And another source was the media analysis. I looked at the media in Chicago and looked for any references, any mention of either of these two groups. Unfortunately, we've had a wonderful Chicago gay press that has documented, I was very interested in documenting the experiences, the events of these groups, so I got a lot of materials from the Chicago queer press. I spent a lot of days in Tracy Baim's basement looking through materials that she had gathered that are now at the Chicago History Museum, but she had all these files, and I spent a lot of days down there looking through all the newspapers and all the clippings, and I got a lot of really good material, so thank you, Tracy. And then, of course, I was a member of Amigas Latinas. When I moved to Chicago in the year 2000, that was one of the first things I did was find that this group existed, a group for Latina lesbians, and I was a member of the group right from when I moved into Chicago. And I became a member of the board in 2006. I served as secretary for a number of years and then as president for a year. So I'll tell you about those experiences as well. So I'll start with talking briefly about the first organization, LLENA. And I didn't find out about, when I started this work, I was going to document the history of Amigas Latinas. That was the organization that I was working with and that I was familiar with. And then through my conversations with people, they let me know that there was another organization that pre-existed Amigas Latinas, and I got really interested in this. I talked to people I found through outlines and through talking to Tracy Baim. I found out about the existence of this organization called LLENA, which came about in 1988. And the organization was initiated by this woman right here, Amparo Jimenez. She's the founder of LLENA. And so she's an interesting character. She came to Chicago in 1987, and she came from Mexico City. She was an activist there, a longtime activist and a journalist. And she came to Chicago, and she was really surprised that there was very little going on in terms of Latina organizing. She immediately got involved with working with an organization combating AIDS. So she was an activist. She got right involved in the political life, the queer political life of Chicago. But she was wondering, where are the Latina lesbians? Where are the Latino gay men? Why wasn't she seeing any organizing, any events around those groups? And she was complaining about this at a party one night, and it happened that Tracy Baim was there. Tracy Baim offered her the opportunity to have a column in Outlines, which was the queer newspaper that Tracy was the publisher of. And this is pretty significant actually, because not only was she offered this space in the gay newspaper, she was also permitted to write the articles in Spanish. And this is pretty radical. This is the first evidence I could find anywhere in the country of a queer newspaper, predominantly English language, that was written in the English language, actually having a Spanish language column. And not only did it have actually Amparo's column, but a whole page. There was a section called Encuentro Latino, and in this section it included Amparo's article, and Amparo also solicited work from other people who had something they wanted to write about. And so for a number of years, the page appeared in Spanish in the paper. Later on, it continued, but it was in English. And even after Amparo left Chicago, she went off to Costa Rica to edit a queer newspaper called La Confidencial. She still sent columns to Chicago, and they were printed in this paper. So that was the first Latina lesbian presence in Spanish in the paper. But another thing that Amparo did was she put an ad in the paper in, I think it was September 1988, to say that she wanted to bring together Latina lesbians. And through the information in the newspaper, as well as through her own efforts, calling people, inviting them to come and meet. The first meeting of LLENA took place in November 1988, November 4, 1988. And 10 people attended the first meeting from the reports I got. And they were women who were from different nationalities, Mexicans, Cubans, Puerto Ricans, there was a Salvadoran woman. And they were women who were from different generations. They were first generation, primarily Spanish-speaking people like Amparo, and second generation Puerto Ricans, Mexicans who were born and raised in Chicago. There was a lot of excitement about this coming together, and there was immediately it was decided that the group would form as a group, and that they would continue to meet. And so they did, and they attracted a lot of people. From the interviews that I conducted, I was told that there were meetings used to draw 30 to 40 different women. Again, women from all these different backgrounds, first generation, second generation, people from different nationalities, different age groups. There were people in their 20s, there were people in their 60s. It was a pretty diverse group. And one of the challenges, because of this diversity, was that some people were primarily Spanish speaking, some people were primarily English language speaking, which meant that the meetings had to be bilingual. And that was a big challenge. And one of the reasons why the meetings ended up lasting 3 to 4 hours, because they were trying to meet all these needs. They were trying to make sure that everybody who was there was able to participate fully. And they took, again, they made a great effort to document what they were doing. So they published minutes after each of the meetings, and the minutes, again, were bilingual also, which takes a lot of commitment and a lot of work to produce that. So I'm just going to quote from one of the LLENA members that I interviewed, because I think she really captures how important this gathering of women who had never had a space before to meet outside of bars and small communities of friends. This was the first time that Latina lesbians in Chicago had the opportunity to meet other people who were also lesbians, and it was a very exciting time. So one of the LLENA members, when I was talking about how important this group was to people, she quoted, this is one of her quotes, and this is not, I'm going to name someone, this is not the person's name. She says, I remember Sandra Rodriguez, who was probably the geekiest of the geeks, Puerto Rican, very low income. You know, she was just very homely, very dykey. And I saw her, and I brought her into the group, and within a year, to see this girl with low self-esteem, glasses, short hair, I mean, she just started to glow because people recognized her for who she was. And Sandra became like my bodyguard. And I didn't want that, but I think she felt so loyal that we would just say, come on, no issues about your identity, what you look like, how much you make, what kind of work you had or you don't have, just come along and be with us. So I think that quote kind of captures, you know, the significance and how important this group was to people, and the fact that it really made an attempt to be inclusive of all kinds of folks. The group first met in people's houses, and then it started meeting at Horizons, which was the LGBTQ center in Chicago. At the time, they ended up looking for alternate space. They felt that that group, that space, Horizons, was a primarily white male space, and that they didn't feel very welcome in that space. And so they started looking around for a space within the Latino community. However, the problem there was that some of the women did not want to be in a queer group, a gay group within the Latino community, because they were closeted and they felt that this would put them at risk. So there was some debate about that. But some of the women worked with the Puerto Rican Cultural Center in Humboldt Park, and they asked the executive director, Jose Lopez, if they could meet in that space. And this is a letter from Jose Lopez, where he actually invites the women to come and speak, to come and meet in this space. And it's a very nice letter. He says, you know, the work that you're doing is very important, and we support you in the work. And we also think that the Latino community needs to fight against homophobia. So of course, you are welcome to use the space, and we look forward to working together on issues that are important to both of us. So I think that's a significant move that LLENA made of entering into Latino dominant spaces, and it's also a tribute to Jose Lopez and the cultural center, the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, which opened up and welcomed the women. Another reason that there was some hesitancy about using that space was because the space, the cultural center was associated with radicalism. It had been very active in the movement for the independence of Puerto Rico, and some of the women were nervous about that, about being in that space. Actually, some of the spaces dominated by the activists in the community had been raided by the FBI, and so there was a fear that of being in this space and being associated with that kind of radicalism. Again, one of the differences that was found in LLENA was political differences. Some of the women were leftist, and other women were more centrist, and other women were right-wing. So that was one of the differences, another of the differences that the group had to negotiate. But so they got off, the first time they marched in the Gay Pride Parade was in 1988. This was also controversial, again, because some of the women were out and some of the women weren't. Some of the women felt that they didn't want to have a public face, that the point of the group was to have a safe space for Latina lesbians, and they were just interested in meeting. They weren't interested in this question of visibility. For other women, that was the whole point of the group, to get out there, to let the Latino community know that Latina lesbians were part of that group, and to let the primarily white, mainstream LGBTQ activist community also know that Latinas were part of that. So that was also a tension that continued to exist throughout the life of the group. Another thing, LLENA means, as you see here, Latina, lesbians, and nuestro ambiente. And that's a pretty cool name because LLENA in Spanish means complete. And so as one of the members said, they really thought that name captured the sense of the group, because we were in our space and there was a sense of completeness. So that explains the name of the group. Another thing that's important to recognize is that when this group came together in 1998 in this country, we were experiencing this energy around the possibility of forming a third world women's feminist movement. And the women who were active in this in Jena were very much, some of the women were very much a part of that, or felt that energy and were committed to building this kind of movement. Some of the books that you see up here, this bridge on my back, Radical Writings by Women of Color, Chuli Moraga, Gloria and Saldua, but some of us are brave, put together by African American women, compañeras, Juanita Ramos. These were the books that people were reading at the time and that were having an impact on how people were thinking about organizing and doing the work that they were doing. One of the things that the group was really interested in doing was holding cultural events, bringing out the contributions of Latina, lesbian authors, and they held a number of events that when I was looking at the flyers, I was really impressed. Like this event in 1989, some of the speakers were Sandra Cisneros, Ana Castillo, Diana Solis, people who are very well known now and who were absolutely committed to supporting the efforts of Jena. And also a number of the members of Jena, like Amparo Jimenez and Diana Solis, were actually poets and writers themselves and artists. So they held these cultural events, and they also held them within the Latino community. So that was another way that the group was integrating their message, their space, their lives into the Latino community. Jena produced a newsletter. This was the first newsletter in 1990. Again, there was a controversy about whether or not the group should have a newsletter, because there was this fear again of being out and being open and people knowing who folks were. Amparo Jimenez really pushed to have this newsletter and said, okay, if you don't want to write it, don't. But there's some of us who do. And so the first issue is beautifully done. It was again bilingual to make sure everybody was included. It has the logo of the group up on the right. It had a number of articles explaining who the group was, explaining that the group was in solidarity with African Americans, with Asian Americans, with Native Americans, wanting again to think about the group as part of this third world feminist